It started with flashing blue lights slicing through the warm glow of my backyard. Music was playing, steaks were sizzling, and the sound of laughter carried over the water. Then, right on cue, she appeared, Karen Winters, our HOA president, striding up with a smug look and a cell phone still warm from dialing 911. She was convinced she'd caught me in the act, hosting some illegal gathering that would finally prove her right about me being a rule breaker. The officers stood there, awkward, scanning the scene. Kids were splashing in the pool. Neighbors were chatting over iced tea. Nothing like the chaos she'd promised them. What Karen didn't know was that her little stunt had just blown up in her face. Sitting in my hot tub, sipping lemonade, was the governor's own daughter. And when that black SUV with government plates rolled up a few minutes later, Karen's smirk faded faster than the ice in her glass. My name's Michael Harris. I'm 52 years old, and I moved out here to Lake Haven Estates 3 years ago with one goal in mind: peace. I'd spent the better part of 3 decades building my contracting business from the ground up, working 12-hour days, rain or shine. By the time I sold the company, my knees cracked every time I stood up. My shoulders ached like they'd been carrying bricks since birth. And I'd earned the right to put my feet up without someone calling me lazy. Lake Haven looked like the dream. The streets curved along the shoreline like they'd been drawn with a gentle hand. Every lot had just enough space to breathe. The lawns were manicured, and the houses had those neat little porches where you could picture yourself watching the sunset with a cold drink. The lake itself shimmered like a piece of glass on calm mornings, and when the wind picked up, you could hear the water slap against the docks in a steady rhythm that made you slow down without even trying. My place sits at the edge of the cul-de-sac, backed right up to the water. The crown jewel is my backyard, a space I designed down to the inch. Wide cedar deck, a pool I had custom built with a natural stone waterfall, and a barbecue setup I'd put any steakhouse pitmaster to shame with. I planted a row of crepe myrtles along the fence line for privacy, but left just enough open space so the lake view could sneak through. To me, this was retirement done right. A quiet cup of coffee in the morning, watching herons fish along the shore, the occasional afternoon out on the pontoon, and weekends grilling for family and friends. Of course, what I didn't realize when I signed the papers was that behind the smiling faces of the welcome committee lurked the HOA. And at the head of it, the undisputed queen of control was Karen Winters. If you've never met a HOA Karen, count yourself lucky. She's in her mid-50s, but dresses like she's on her way to a country club brunch every day. Perfect bob haircut, pearl necklace that practically squeaks with self-importance, and a voice pitched to carry across lawns whether you ask to hear it or not. She runs the HOA like a personal kingdom, quoting bylaws like scripture and reminding people of fines the way a mob boss reminds you of debts. When I first moved in, I made the rookie mistake of thinking we'd get along fine. I'm not a troublemaker. I mow my lawn. I keep my trash bins out of sight, and I don't park on the street overnight. But Karen doesn't just enforce rules, she hunts for infractions like a bloodhound. If your grass is a shade too brown, if your mailbox flag squeaks when it moves, if your wind chimes are too audible, she's at your door with a printed notice. She came by my second week here, clipboard in hand, to welcome me and also remind me that my grill, while impressive, technically needed to be positioned 5 feet farther from the fence. She even measured it. I smiled, thanked her, and moved it mostly to avoid starting anything before I'd even unpacked my boxes. But I made a mental note right then, this woman was going to be trouble. Still, I tried to stay on her good side. I waved when I saw her. I showed up to the occasional HOA meeting, kept my mouth shut, and paid my dues on time. But if you've ever dealt with someone like Karen, you know that being neutral doesn't keep you off their radar. She thrives on control, and if she can't find a reason to exercise it, she'll invent one. For a while, it was minor stuff, a warning about leaving my kayak on the dock overnight, a suggestion that I tone down my porch lighting because it distracted from the neighborhood's ambiance. Annoying, sure, but nothing worth a battle. I let most of it roll off my back, and then summer rolled around. My nephew, David, was coming home after 2 years overseas with the Navy. The kid practically grew up in my house. His dad, my younger brother, passed away when David was 12, and I'd stepped in as the closest thing to a father figure. When I heard he was getting leave, I wanted to do something special. A pool party with family, close friends, plenty of food. Something that said, "Welcome home, you made it." I started planning weeks ahead, ordered extra chairs, rented a couple of big shade umbrellas, stocked the fridge and coolers. My grill got a full tune-up, and I even had the pool guy out twice to make sure the water was crystal clear. I wasn't throwing some frat party. This was going to be a laid-back afternoon with maybe 30 people, music at a reasonable volume, and a spread of food that'd make you forget your diet in a heartbeat. The day before the party, I was setting up tables on the deck when I noticed the familiar shadow of Karen's golf cart creeping along the curb. She slowed to a stop right in front of my driveway, sunglasses perched on her nose like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "You know," she called out, "HOA guidelines limit gatherings to 10 people. I wiped my hands on my shorts and walked over. "Afternoon. Karen, I'm pretty sure the county ordinances allow more than that. It's my private property." She gave a tight little smile. "HOA rules are there for a reason. We don't want to disturb the peace or draw undesirable attention." "I'm not planning on disturbing anything," I said evenly. "It's a family party." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, just so you're aware, I'd hate for there to be a misunderstanding." She rolled away, but the way her lips pressed together told me this wasn't the last I'd hear about it. And I was right. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. The morning of the party started out exactly the way I'd pictured it. The sun came up over the lake in a soft haze. The air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass, and there was just enough breeze to keep the heat from settling in too early. I had a mug of coffee in one hand and my to-do list in the other, and for once, I actually felt ahead of schedule. By 10 a.m., the deck was ready, coolers packed with ice, ribs already marinating, music playlist queued up with a mix of country, classic rock, and a few of David's favorites from his high school days. My sister-in-law had arrived early with her famous potato salad, and a couple of my neighbors' folks who actually enjoy life were helping string up a few extra lights along the railing. That's when I noticed the first sign Karen was circling. Her golf cart rolled past slowly, like a shark checking out the edge of a reef. I caught her eye, gave a friendly nod, and went back to adjusting the grill. At noon, guests started arriving. David showed up in jeans and a ball cap, looking a little older, a little leaner, but with that same easy grin. His friends from the service clapped him on the back, and you could tell they'd been through things most of us will never understand. The energy was warm, grateful, and just a little bit emotional. About half an hour in, as the first burgers hit the grill, I spotted Karen standing at the corner of my property, holding her phone. She wasn't taking pictures this time, she was filming. Slowly, deliberately, panning across the deck and yard like she was documenting a crime scene. "Hey, Mike," my buddy Jeff muttered, nodding toward her. "You got a permit for this dangerous level of potato salad." I chuckled, but I could feel my jaw tightening. Just ignore her. She's fishing for something. Karen made her way down the sidewalk, stopping to count aloud loud enough for people to hear. 17, 18, 19. She paused, scribbled something on her clipboard, then called out, "Remember, HOA gatherings have a limit for a reason." David overheard her and frowned. "What's her deal, long story?" I said, "Short version, she's allergic to people enjoying themselves." By 2 o'clock, the party was in full swing. Kids were in the pool. The smell of barbecue filled the air, and the hum of conversation blended with the music. If there was any disturbance, it was only the kind that comes from happiness, and in my book, that's the best kind there is. That's when Karen made her first official move. She marched straight up my driveway, stopping just short of the deck stairs. "Michael," she began, with that faux polite tone she uses when she's about to say something unpleasant. "I've counted well over 30 individuals here. That's triple the HOA guideline." "Karen," I replied evenly, "we've talked about this. The HOA can't dictate how many people I have on my private property. There's nothing in your rules that overrides county law." She pursed her lips. "The rules are about preserving the character of our community. A large gathering like this brings noise, traffic, and potential liabilities. I raised an eyebrow. Liabilities like what? Too much laughter, dangerously good brisket. A few guests chuckled, which only seemed to make her more rigid. I'm just warning you, Michael, if this continues, I'll have to escalate the matter. And there it was. The word escalate from someone like Karen is less of a threat and more of a promise. She thrives on turning molehills into mountains. I gave her a polite smile. Have a good afternoon, Karen. Then I turned back to the grill, effectively ending the conversation. She stood there for a moment, maybe expecting me to fold, then stalked off down the sidewalk. The rest of the afternoon should have been easy, but I couldn't help noticing her shadow every half hour or so, pausing by the curb, jotting notes, pretending to talk to someone on her phone while clearly aiming her camera toward my yard. By late afternoon, as the sun dipped lower, the lights we'd strung up began to glow. The party was winding into that sweet spot where everyone's relaxed, full, and just enjoying the evening. And then I caught it Karen on the corner again, phone to her ear, voice raised just enough for me to hear snippets. Yes, it's a large, unauthorized gathering. There's alcohol. I believe minors are present. I stared at her for a second, the words sinking in. She wasn't just making idle threats anymore. She was calling this in. David walked over. Everything okay? I kept my voice low. She's calling someone sounds like the police. His eyebrows shot up. You're kidding. Nope. And I'd bet money she's exaggerating every detail. Sure enough, about 15 minutes later, the distant sound of sirens drifted over the water. Conversations faltered. A couple of kids climbed out of the pool. Curious. The sirens grew louder, and then the flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. Karen, standing at the corner, actually straightened her posture, as if she'd summoned backup to finally take me down. She even waved the officers toward my driveway like a traffic director. And that's when I knew this wasn't just going to be about my nephew's welcome home party anymore. This was about principle. She'd crossed a line from nosy to malicious, and I wasn't going to just stand there and let her win. I didn't know it yet, but her little call was about to set off a chain of events she could never have predicted. The police cruiser eased up my driveway with its headlights cutting across the deck. Music lowered instinctively. Conversations dipped into uneasy murmurs. I stepped forward, wiping my hands on a towel, keeping my expression neutral. Two officers climbed out. Both of them looked more puzzled than stern. The lead officer, a tall guy with a calm face, glanced around like he was expecting a brawl and instead found a backyard straight out of a 4th of July magazine spread. "Afternoon, sir," he said. "We got a call about a disturbance and possible alcohol violations." Behind him, Karen was already walking up, heels clicking on the pavement despite the fact she'd been in her golf cart earlier. "Yes, officers," she began, voice dripping with righteous concern. "I'm the president of the HOA here, and this gathering is well above the approved size. There are minors present, and I believe alcohol is being served openly." I held up a hand. "Before you go on, Karen, let's be clear. This is my private property. The music's under ordinance limits, and every adult here of legal age is enjoying a perfectly legal drink. Would you like to check IDs, officer?" The tall cop exchanged a quick glance with his partner. "No, sir. Everything looks fine from where I'm standing." Karen's jaw tightened. "But the noise. It's within the limit." The cop interrupted gently. "Ma'am, this isn't really a police matter unless there's a violation of local law." The look Karen shot him could have cut steel. "I expect you to uphold community standards. That's the HOA's responsibility." "Ma'am," he said, already stepping back toward his cruiser. It should have ended there. The officers left, shaking their heads, and the party started to pick up again. But Karen wasn't the type to accept a failed mission gracefully. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the HOA board notice of investigation repeated disruptions to community harmony. The wording was so vague it could have been about anything from barking dogs to an alien invasion. I knew exactly where it came from. By midweek, I had 3 more notices. One claimed my pool fence was not in compliance with height regulations, despite it being built to exact county specs. Another accused me of allowing non-resident access to community amenities, meaning my guests. The third alleged that my deck lighting was excessively bright and visible from the lake after 9 p.m. It was harassment dressed in HOA stationery. Neighbors started to notice too. My friend Jeff got a warning about his boat trailer being parked in his own driveway. The Thompsons down the street received a fine for seasonal decorations that apparently weren't seasonal enough. Karen was on a crusade, and I was public enemy number one. The kicker came 2 Saturdays later. I was cleaning the skimmer baskets when Karen rolled up in her golf cart, phone already in hand. "Michael, I've had multiple reports of loud construction noise from your property on weekdays before 8 a.m., she announced. I stared at her. "Karen, I haven't done any construction," she smirked. "Well, I'll have to verify that. We can't have early morning disturbances." "You mean you'll have to make something up," I said flatly. Her eyes narrowed. "Careful, Michael. The rules apply to everyone. Then maybe you should try following them too." I shot back. She didn't answer, just drove off, tires crunching on the gravel like punctuation. It became a pattern. I'd spot her lurking at the corner, see her golf cart parked down the street with the little front windshield flipped up just enough to hide a camera lens. She was collecting her evidence, whatever that meant in her personal court of law. But here's the thing about people like Karen: the more they push, the more likely they are to push too far. And sooner or later, they slip. That slip came during a neighborhood meeting. She was lecturing the group about maintaining decorum when she let it drop casually, like it was nothing that she'd already spoken with her contacts in law enforcement about problematic residents. It was supposed to sound like she had pull at the sheriff's office, but a quick conversation with a deputy friend of mine confirmed otherwise. Her contact was a patrolman she'd gone to high school with, who now handled mostly traffic stops. No special authority, no actual clout, just bluster. Meanwhile, her list of violations against me had grown to the point where she tried to push for an emergency hearing to impose fines. That's when I started keeping meticulous records, every conversation, every email, every supposed infraction documented and dated. I wasn't going to war yet, but I was stacking my ammo. The final escalation came in the form of a certified letter slipped into my mailbox. Failure to comply with HOA guidelines will result in legal action. No details. No specific violation cited, just a threat in bold font. I read it twice, then laughed out loud. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. She wanted me gone, or at least beaten into submission. But here's what Karen didn't realize by trying to escalate every step of the way. She'd built herself a rickety tower made of bad assumptions, and she was about to find out that the view from the top isn't so pretty when it starts to crumble, because in her next move, the one she thought would be her winning blow, she was going to step right into my strongest card yet. The breaking point, and Karen's first real crack, came on a Tuesday morning at the Java Dock, our little lakeside coffee shop. It's the kind of place where retirees read the paper in the corner and the barista knows everyone's drink before they even open their mouths. I was there picking up a couple of cappuccinos to take back to the house when I heard that unmistakable voice, sharp, clipped, carrying just enough for anyone in the room to accidentally overhear. I told Officer Mark, "We've got to keep a closer watch on certain residents, especially him. You know the type. I didn't even have to turn around to know who him was. But I did, and there was Karen, perched on one of the high stools, leaning toward another HOA board member, Beverly, who nodded like a bobblehead. "Michael Harris is trouble," Karen continued, as if she were delivering a news report. "He plays nice, but he thinks the rules don't apply to him. That pool party completely out of line. I've got the proof, and with my police connections, it's just a matter of time." Her police connections. I nearly laughed into my coffee. My nephew's best friend is a sheriff's deputy, and from what he'd told me, her connection was a patrol officer who occasionally wrote up noise complaints, the kind that rarely stuck if they were even filed. Still, I made a note in my phone, Karen, claims special police pull. Untrue. Documentation mattered now, as I was paying. I caught Beverly glancing nervously at me. She looked away quickly, but it confirmed something I'd suspected for a while. Not everyone on the HOA board was completely sold on Karen's crusades. Later that day, my neighbor Jeff stopped by with something interesting. "You ever seen the HOA bylaws?" he asked. "Just the ones they handed me in the welcome packet." I said, "Yeah, well, turns out those aren't the most current ones. In fact, half of what Karen quotes isn't even ratified. They tried to update them 5 years ago, but the vote failed. Everything she's been waving around since then, technically invalid." He handed me a manila envelope. Inside were photocopies of the actual, legally binding bylaws, the ones filed with the county. Sure enough, there was nothing about limits on private gatherings, no authority to dictate guest lists, and no rule about pool fence placement beyond what county code required. I couldn't help smiling. This wasn't just a defense, it was a pressure point. Over the next week, I quietly started assembling my case. Every email from Karen, every violation notice, every photo she'd sent the board about my property, all saved in neat digital folders. I took screenshots of her public HOA newsletters where she'd name me directly, implying I was endangering the neighborhood. I even had that snippet from the coffee shop, caught on my phone's voice memo app after I hit record the second I heard her tone. But I didn't just want proof that she was wrong. I wanted proof that she knew she was wrong, that this wasn't a misunderstanding, but a pattern of harassment. That came sooner than I expected. One of the board members, a guy named Ron, called me after dark one night. His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Look, Mike, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but Karen's been pushing us to approve legal action against you. Only problem is we can't not without a bylaw violation, and you haven't committed one. She knows it. We all know it. But she keeps insisting we interpret the rules more broadly." "Interpret?" I repeated. "Yeah," Ron sighed, which is her way of saying make it up. I'm getting tired of it. "A few of us are." I thanked him, hung up, and added another note to my growing list. Karen's own board wasn't unanimously behind her, and internal division is the best kind of weakness an opponent can have. By now, the game had shifted. She thought she was tightening the noose, but I could see the rope fraying. Every move she made was giving me more leverage, more documentation, and more allies. I started attending HOA meetings again, not to argue, just to listen, watching her squirm when I asked calm, reasonable questions in front of the room was almost worth the irritation of being there. I could see the flicker in her eyes when she realized I knew more about the actual bylaws than she did. Meanwhile, I kept up my normal life. I didn't give her the satisfaction of reacting with anger. I waved when I saw her, kept my lawn pristine, even put up some tasteful string lights along the deck, the kind that would make her itch to complain, but were 100% compliant. And then came the day I knew she'd overplay her hand completely. She sent an all-residents email claiming there would be heightened enforcement due to ongoing disruptions from a particular household. She didn't name me, but she might as well have posted my address in flashing lights. That was my green light. Between the outdated rules, her baseless claims, her recorded remarks about using police connections, and the fact that board members were starting to turn on her, I now had enough to build something bigger than a defense. I had the makings of a counterattack that could not only stop her, but remove her. She thought she was playing offense. In reality, she was opening every door I needed, and she was about to walk straight through the last one without even realizing it. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's that they can smell when you're not intimidated, and it drives them crazy. My calmness wasn't a sign of surrender, it was a warning shot. She just didn't read it that way. 2 weeks after that HOA-wide email, she made her biggest move yet. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm but breezy. Perfect weather to be outside. My nephew David and I were cleaning the pontoon boat when I saw her golf cart come barreling down the street faster than I'd ever seen it move. She stopped hard at the curb, hopped out, and marched up the driveway with that same clipboard. The universal sign for "I'm about to ruin your day." "Michael," she said, without even a hello, "I have here 3 separate reports of code violations on your property." I didn't even bother to take the paper she was holding out. 3. That's impressive. Did you write them all yourself, or did you outsource? Her nostrils flared. "Don't be flippant. These are serious. First, you have unauthorized lighting visible from the lake past curfew. Second, you've allowed non-residents to access the private dock. Third, There have been repeated instances of excessive noise, most recently last night after 11. I tilted my head. Funny thing, Karen, last night after 11, I was asleep. Want to see the footage from my security cameras? Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't answer. I'm giving you official notice. The board will meet next week to determine penalties. Good, I said. I'll be there. She turned sharply and stalked off, but I could see the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her shoulders. That evening, the real hit came. At 5:30, 2 police cruisers pulled into my driveway. Same lead officer from the pool party day. He stepped out slowly, scanning the yard. Evening, Mr. Harris, he said. We got another call about an unlawful gathering and possible public intoxication. I laughed outright. You're kidding. He shook his head. Wish I was. Look, we've been out here before. We know what's going on. But when we get a call, we have to respond. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Karen, standing halfway down the street, arms crossed, watching like she was waiting for the curtain to go up on her victory scene. You mind if we take a quick look around? The officer asked. Not at all, I said. And while you're here, maybe you can confirm that it's perfectly legal for me to have my brother and nephew standing on my dock with a couple of fishing poles. They walked through, checked the dock, glanced at the deck, nothing out of place. The officer came back shaking his head. Everything's fine here. I'll make a note in the system that these calls seem to be, let's say, repetitive. Appreciate it, I said. As they left, I caught Karen turning away sharply, climbing back into her golf cart like a retreating general. But she wasn't done. Monday morning, I woke up to a bright red envelope taped to my front door. Final warning, cease all non-compliant activity. It was in bold, block letters, as if shouting would make it true. Inside, the letter claimed that failure to comply could result in legal action, fines, and possible revocation of community privileges. That last part actually made me laugh. Revocation of community privileges in a neighborhood where I owned my property outright. That was like threatening to take away my imaginary yacht. I knew then that she was getting desperate. The police calls hadn't worked. The violation notices were empty. So now she was throwing everything she could onto paper, hoping some of it would stick. The problem for her was that desperation makes you sloppy, and sloppy people leave evidence. That week, I got a call from Ron again, the same board member who'd tipped me off before. She's pushing us to vote on legal action this Friday. He said, but here's the thing. She's been emailing members about it using HOA letterhead before the board even discussed it. That's a violation of our own procedures. Mind sending me copies of those emails, I asked. He hesitated for half a second. Already did. Check your inbox. Sure enough, there they were, multiple emails from Karen to select board members and even a few residents, making claims about my non-compliance, as if it were already proven fact. She wasn't just overstepping her authority, she was manufacturing a case in writing. By Thursday, I had my binder ready, every baseless notice, every recorded interaction, copies of the actual bylaws, and now, evidence that she was misusing HOA channels for personal vendettas. Still, I knew Karen would walk into that Friday meeting confident. People like her don't imagine they can lose. They picture themselves as the hero in every story, even when the plot is clearly headed for a twist they won't like. As I slid the binder onto my kitchen table that night, I couldn't help but smile. She thought Friday was the day she'd finally put me in my place. She didn't realize it was the day she'd hand me the perfect stage for the move I'd been planning all along. If Friday's HOA meeting was going to be the battleground, then Thursday night was my war room. I sat at the kitchen table with my binder open, the pages spread like a legal buffet, each one neatly tabbed, dated, and labeled. Karen thought she was walking in with the upper hand. What she didn't realize was that I'd been quietly loading my arsenal for weeks. The first thing I did was double-check the county's property records and HOA filings. I wanted zero chance of her twisting the narrative. Sure enough, every violation she'd cited was either covered by county code, which I was in compliance with, or completely absent from the valid HOA bylaws. That alone would embarrass her in front of the board. But embarrassment wasn't enough. I wanted something she couldn't recover from. That's where my next step came in. You see, Karen didn't know who some of my guests at that pool party really were. The governor's niece had been there, my friend Mark's daughter, along with 2 members of the governor's security detail, both off-duty but still very much in the loop when it came to political protocol. They'd been invited weeks in advance, and I'd notified security just to make sure the visit was smooth. I made a few phone calls that Thursday morning. By noon, I had confirmation that the governor's office was aware of the 911 call Karen had made during the party, and they weren't happy about it. Apparently, summoning law enforcement to a gathering that included the governor's family, especially when no laws were being broken, was viewed as, in their words, ill-advised and potentially disruptive to official security operations. That was gold. I didn't even need them to show up at the meeting. A short, polite letter from the governor's office would be enough. And by 5 p.m., it was in my inbox, official letterhead, dated, signed by his chief of staff, making it clear that the incident had been noted. That went right into the binder. Next, I compiled a timeline, not just dates of her harassment, but proof of escalation, the pool party filming, the baseless police calls, the bogus violation notices, the public emails targeting me by implication. I laid it out like a prosecutor prepping for trial. Each item cross-referenced with a bylaw or county statute that proved she was wrong. Then I added the internal HOA emails Ron had sent me, the ones showing she'd been lobbying for action against me before the board had even met to discuss it. That alone violated their own governance procedures. If the rest of the board had any sense of self-preservation, they'd realize sticking with her could open them up to liability. By the time I closed the binder, I knew I wasn't just walking into that meeting to defend myself. I was walking in to dismantle her credibility piece by piece. Friday came, and I made one last phone call to my nephew David. "You busy tonight?" I asked. "Not really." "Why HOA meeting? Bring your uniform." He laughed. "You want me to scare them." "Not scare, just remind them who you are." At 6:45 p.m., I arrived at the community clubhouse. The meeting room was already half full, retirees in polos, young couples with toddlers, the usual suspects who either loved or loathed HOA politics. Karen was at the head table, papers neatly stacked, her expression the smug calm of someone convinced she's about to win. When I walked in carrying my binder, she gave me a little nod, the kind of nod you give to an opponent you think is already beaten. David came in right behind me, in full Navy dress uniform, and took a seat in the second row. Heads turned. People whispered. Even Beverly, Karen's board ally, glanced at him with curiosity. The meeting started with the usual formalities. Then Karen moved straight to new business, clearly eager. "We have before us repeated and serious violations committed by Mr. Harris," she began, her voice carrying with practiced authority. "These violations disrupt the harmony of our community and put our standards at risk. I am proposing immediate fines and the suspension of certain privileges until compliance is achieved." I raised my hand. "Madam President, I'd like to respond." She gestured toward me with mock patience. Briefly, "Please." I opened the binder. "First, I'd like to enter into the record the actual legally filed bylaws of this HOA. You'll notice they contain none of the restrictions I'm accused of violating. Second, I'd like to submit documentation proving that each notice I've received was either factually incorrect or procedurally invalid. Third, I flipped to the next section. I'd like to share a letter from the governor's office regarding the events of July 16th. I read it aloud. The room went quiet. Karen's smile froze. And lastly, I continued. I have here emails from the HOA president to select members and residents using official letterhead, making claims about my alleged non-compliance before the board had discussed or voted on the matter. This is a clear violation of our own governance rules and, I would argue, an abuse of office. I closed the binder gently. I'll let the board decide how they want to handle this, but I will not be paying a single fine based on fabricated rules. David sat there, calm as a statue, his uniform doing half the talking for me. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, especially given the whole governor's family connection. Karen's face was pale now, but she wasn't out yet, and I knew the next 10 minutes would decide whether she tried to claw back or finally realized she'd walked into checkmate. You could have heard a pin drop in that meeting room. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner, pushing cool air into a space that suddenly felt charged. Karen sat rigid at the head table, lips pressed thin, eyes darting between me, the binder, and the faces in the room. "Mr. Harris," she said finally, her voice tighter now. "These materials you've brought are not the full picture. The board has received numerous complaints," from whom I interrupted, my voice calm but steady, because as far as I can tell, most of those complaints came from you, sometimes under the name of the HOA, without board approval. A low murmur rippled through the room. Karen's gaze swept over the crowd. "As president, I am empowered to act in the best interest of this community, within the rules," I said, flipping open the binder again, "which, as we've all just seen, you've been ignoring." I tapped the stack of bylaws in front of me. "And these rules, the actual legally binding ones, don't give you the authority to invent restrictions or preemptively punish residents. You've acted outside your scope, repeatedly." Ron, the board member who'd tipped me off, cleared his throat. "I'd like to add something. As a board, we never voted to pursue legal action against Mr. Harris. That decision was never discussed in an official meeting before notices were sent." The murmur grew louder. Heads turned toward Karen, her face flushed. "I sometimes urgent action is required. I can't wait for bureaucracy when you're trying to settle a personal score," I said, my tone still level but with a sharper edge, because that's what this is. Personal. And now it's dragged this entire board and this entire community into something it never needed to be a part of. I slid the governor's letter across the table toward her. "You called the police on a legal gathering, one that included members of the governor's family, which was coordinated with his security detail in advance. That incident is now noted at the state level as disruptive. Not to me, to them. Do you understand what kind of position that puts you in?" Karen's hand hovered over the paper but didn't touch it. I turned slightly, letting my voice carry to the rest of the room. "I moved here for peace. I've complied with every legitimate rule, kept my property in top shape, and treated people respectfully. What I won't do is be bullied by someone who thinks their title gives them the right to rewrite the rules as they go along." From the second row, David stood up, in his navy dress uniform. He was an imposing sight. "If I can speak," he said. Karen hesitated, then gave a small nod, probably because refusing would look bad. "I was the guest of honor at that pool party." David said, "I served overseas for 2 years. That gathering was a welcome home from family and friends. I saw nothing illegal, nothing disruptive except for someone pacing the sidewalk, filming us like we were criminals. That someone was the HOA president." You could feel the room shift. Neighbors who'd been silent until now began whispering, some shaking their heads. Ron spoke up again. "Given the circumstances and the evidence presented, I propose we table any action against Mr. Harris and instead review the conduct of our current president." That was the crack I'd been waiting for. "I second that," another board member said, surprising even me. Karen's composure faltered. "This is outrageous. You're letting one resident manipulate. I'm not manipulating anything." I said, "I'm showing facts. And the facts point to you overstepping your authority, targeting residents without cause, and misrepresenting the HOA's rules." A woman in the back stood up. "She fined me last year for having my daughter's car in the driveway overnight. Said it was against the rules. I looked it up. It wasn't. But I paid it because I didn't want trouble." Another neighbor added, "Same here, over my boat trailer. It was like opening a floodgate. One by one, people began sharing their own petty or unfounded run-ins with Karen. The more they spoke, the redder her face became. Finally, Ron raised his voice over the chatter. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the HOA president, pending a full review of her actions." The room went still again, but this time it was different. You could feel the decision hanging there. Heavy, but inevitable. "All in favor?" Ron asked. Hands went up first cautiously, then in a wave. Even Beverly, her staunchest ally, lifted hers after a moment's hesitation. Karen's eyes widened, like she'd just realized the ground had given way under her. "You can't. It's in the bylaws," I said quietly. "The real ones." The vote was called. Majority in favor. Effective immediately. Karen was removed as president, pending the review. She gathered her papers in stiff silence, avoiding eye contact. When she passed me, she paused just long enough to say, "You'll regret this." I didn't respond. Some battles end with fireworks, others with a quiet retreat. This one ended with the soft click of the clubhouse door closing behind her. I looked around the room, saw the relieved faces, the whispered about time comments. The tide had turned, and not just for me. The neighborhood had just realized it didn't have to live under her thumb, and I knew this wasn't just a win. It was the end of her reign. When I walked out of that clubhouse, the air felt different, lighter somehow, like the whole street had exhaled at once. Karen's golf cart sat parked under a street lamp, but she wasn't in it. She'd left without saying goodbye to anyone, and judging by the way the crowd had turned on her, she wouldn't be coming back in any position of authority. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on the deck when my neighbor Jeff wandered over, hands in his pockets. "Well," he said with a grin, "you sure know how to put on a show." I shrugged. "Didn't plan it that way. Just wanted the truth out there." He nodded toward the clubhouse. Board's already talking about rewriting some procedures, real ones, not Karen's imaginary version. You might have started something. Over the next week, I noticed little changes. People waved more when they drove by. Conversations at the mailbox didn't feel so guarded. Even Beverly, who'd always backed Karen to the hilt, stopped me one afternoon to say she never realized how far things had gone. Whether she meant it or was just saving face, I didn't care. The HOA sent out an official notice pending the review of recent events. The board will operate under interim leadership. Residents are encouraged to bring forward any concerns regarding previous enforcement actions. That last part was the polite way of saying, if Karen burned you, now's your chance to speak up. I stayed out of the politics. My job was done. But word got around a few neighbors had their fines refunded. Others had violations dismissed. Turns out, my case wasn't the only one built on shaky ground. As for Karen, she didn't vanish completely. I'd see her now and then, walking her little white poodle down the street. She kept her head down, sunglasses on, and didn't so much as glance in my direction. No more golf cart patrols, no more measuring tape, no more letters in red envelopes. One afternoon, David came by for a barbecue, this time without the uniform. "Gotta say, Uncle Mike?" He laughed, flipping a burger. "That was the most entertaining HOA meeting I've ever been to." "You've only been to one," I pointed out. "Exactly." We clinked glasses, and I couldn't help feeling that same satisfaction you get after finishing a tough project. The kind where you know every late night, every bit of effort was worth it. But it wasn't about winning against Karen. Not really. It was about proving that people like her, the self-appointed enforcers, the ones who think rules are a weapon instead of a framework, only win when you let them. A month later, the governor's office sent me a short follow-up letter thanking me for my professional handling of an unnecessary incident. I framed it and hung it in my office, not out of ego, but as a reminder sometimes the best revenge is just letting the facts speak louder than the noise. The deck lights still shine at night. The grill still fires up on weekends. And the lake well. It's as peaceful as the day I moved here. Maybe more so now that the neighborhood knows its own strength. I learned something important through all of this. Standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting the loudest or throwing the first punch. Sometimes it's about preparation, patience, and timing. Sometimes it's about letting your opponent build their own trap, and then just watching them step into it. For me, the battle with Karen was a reminder that peace is worth protecting and that you don't have to give it up just because someone else thrives on chaos. Life has a way of testing our boundaries, often through people who seem determined to push them. In moments like that, it's easy to react out of anger or frustration, but lasting victories rarely come from impulse. They come from patience, strategy, and knowing the truth is on your side. This story isn't just about a petty HOA feud. It's about the idea that bullies, no matter how much power they think they hold, crumble when you shine a light on their actions. It's about respecting yourself enough to stand up without stooping down. And it's about remembering that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm while you quietly prepare your win. So if you're watching this and you've got your own Karen in life, whether it's a neighbor, a coworker, or someone who just can't resist stirring trouble, remember you don't have to fight on their terms. You can fight smart. And when you do, you'll not only protect your peace, you might just inspire the people around you to do the same. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone who made it their mission to make your life harder? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to join our growing community. Because here, we believe in living well, standing tall, and never letting a bad neighbor steal a good day.